Happy Wednesday, everyone. Today's objective is I can solve in factored form. What we're going to do is I'm just going to skip the warm-up for right now because I'm pretty sure you can remember how to solve equations. And we get to do some practice with them in the actual problems we're doing, and I don't want this video to get too long. So we are going to solve today using the zero product property, and I will show you how that works. So solve the equation is what we're going to do right now. So the equation we're going to work with is this right here. This equation is in factored form. You have factor A and you have factor B, and those two are being multiplied together to set equal to 0. So when you have that situation, you set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So I took factor A, set it equal to 0, and I took factor B and I set it equal to 0, and now I'm going to solve them each separately. So I'm going to add 4 to both sides and solve. So x will equal 4. Here I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides, and x will equal negative 2. Remember, when you're solving equations, it's like undoing. You do the opposite of what was happening. So my answer to this problem is x equals 4 and x equals negative 2. Let's move on to the next one. This is my equation that I'm working with. I have two factors. I have factor A and I have factor B. They're being multiplied together. They're set equal to 0. So I'm going to separate the factors. I'm going to set each factor equal to 0, and then I'm going to solve them. So my first one, I'm going to add 6 to both sides. Remember, you do the opposite of what's happening. So 2x equals 6. And now I undo multiplication, so I divide by 2. And x will equal 3. That's my first answer. Here, I'm going to add 1 to both sides, and x will equal 1. My two answers. Now the next two problems are the exact same thing as what I just did. So I'm not going to do them because it's more of the same. So let's move on to the little harder problems. All right. So do the problems above look familiar? They are factors of quadratics, okay? So we've done those before. Now, the problems we're looking at right now are not in factored form. There's no parentheses or anything of that nature. So what we're going to do is we are going to factor them. Now remember, the first step in factoring is look for a greatest common factor. So in this first problem, I look at 2 and 8. And I ask myself, what is the greatest common factor of 2 and 8? And you should say 2. Now I have 2 x's here, and I have 1 x here. How many x's do they have in common? They have 1 x in common. So I need to pull that out as well. Then I set my parentheses, and I have 2 spots to fill. 2 divided by 2 is 1. I took 1 x out, therefore I have 1 x left. 8 divided by 2 is 4. I took the x out, so I have no x's to replace, but 8 divided by 2 is positive 4, so this is a plus inside. Now remember, that is equal to 0. So now I have one factor, I have x, and I have 2. Now it's 2 times x times 1x plus 4. I write that as 3 separate factors because there's 3 separate things being multiplied together. So now I take 2, I set it equal to 0. I take x, I set it equal to 0. And I take 1x plus 4, and I set it equal to 0. Now let's think about this. Does 2 equal 0? Does that even make sense? Hopefully your answer is no, so I just cross it out. X equals 0. Is that already solved for the variable? Yes. X equals 0 is our first answer. Here, our next problem, 1x plus 4, I need to solve for x. So I need to first undo that 4, so minus 4. And I have x equals negative 4. There's my next answer. Perfect. One answer, two answers. All right, let's go on to the next problem. X squared plus 3x minus 18. Now, hopefully you remember that when you have a leading coefficient of 1, you can just look at the factors of your constant, negative 18, and list them. So I'm going to look at the factors of negative 18 and find the factors that add up to 3. So we have negative 6 times 3. Well, when I add those together, I get negative 3. How about negative 3 times 6? Well, when I add those together, I get positive 3. So this is the pair that I want right here. Now I don't need to use the AC method if my leading coefficient is 1. Some of you do, and that's great, but you don't have to. So I can jump right to my two sets of parentheses. You ask yourself, what times what gives you x squared? X and x. And then I just fill in my other numbers. Negative 3 plus 6 equals 0. Okay, so here are my two factors. I set them each equal to 0. X minus 3 equals 0. X plus 6 equals 0. And now I solve them both. I add 3. X equals 3. I subtract 6. X equals negative 6. So there are my two answers. So that doesn't look too bad. Let's see what we have on the next page. This other one here, 3x squared minus 14x plus 8. It doesn't have a leading coefficient of 1, so I'm going to have to do my A, B, C, AC method. So A is 3, B is negative 14, C is 8, and AC is what? 3 times 8 is 24. So I want to list the factors of 24 that would add up to negative 14. Well, I actually see it right away. I know that negative 12 times negative 2, they multiply to negative 24, but when I add them together, they gave me negative 14. Now I know that because I've been doing this for a long time, and it comes easier for me. Some of you might take a little bit longer. All right, so I am going to use these two factors to replace this number right here. So 3x squared minus 12x minus 2x plus 8 equals 0. Now remember, when we're factoring using the AC method, we cut it in half. We look for our greatest common factor on both sides. So on this left-hand side, greatest common factor of 3 and 12 is 3. I also need to take out an x. If I take out an x, I have an x here. 12 divided by 3 is 4. So there we go. Now over here, remember, I want to have the exact same thing in parentheses. So in order to get a minus in this spot, I remember I need to factor out something negative. So greatest common factor of 2 and 8 would be 2, but I'm going to factor out a negative 2 so that this becomes a positive x and a negative 4. Now, these are the same, which is good. So I'm going to write it down here. Remember, we only write it once. We cross it out. And then I'm going to write 3x minus 2. That comes from this and this. And then set it equal to 0, because remember, we're solving. Now, set each of them equal to 0 and solve. X minus 4 equals 0. 3x minus 2 equals 0. My first one will be, if I add 4, x will equal 4. This one I need to add 2. I have 3x equals 2. Then I divide by 3, and x will equal 2/3. That's my second answer. Alright, so I gave you an example of each type of problem. Now you need to go and try these in your homework on your worksheet. Follow these examples, do your best, and ask each other for help. You cannot just sit there and do nothing. Alright, well, I will leave more for you to do tomorrow, and I hope to see you soon. Room here. Alright, more the same. Let's go back.